Hi, I'm Jason Buffington. I'm Veeam's Vice President of Solution Strategy and a former Microsoft MVP. For the next 20 minutes, we're going to talk about the Veeam Microsoft ecosystem and how you can protect your data across data centers, endpoints, edges, and clouds. So for our session today, we're going to talk about what's driving data protection into 2021, and then I'm going to share with you 6 ways to accelerate your journey to the cloud, including Office 365, Azure production workloads, leveraging Azure for disaster recovery, and even Kubernetes containers, all within the Azure framework. Before we get into the details of those solutions, let's look at what really is driving data protection. Veeam recently finished a survey, actually a third-party analyst firm did the survey for us. They didn't know us from Veeam. And the question was, which of the following would drive your organization to change its primary backup solution to a new solution or service? And you can see there's a lot of things on this list. This is what we believe to be the largest single data protection research project available in market today, 2,800 enterprises across 28 different countries around the world. Let's look at what they said. The number one response of what would drive you to change your data protection solution? Reliability. Just the fact of wanting it to work better. It's actually the number 2 reply overall, but when you can only choose one thing that matters, what matters most in backup? Then it actually works. Reliability. Secondly to that is economics. Now, economics comes in a couple different variations. So you can look at in the number 2 slot, we see better improvement on return on investment, ROI, or total cost of ownership, TCO. That's value. Down a few spots, we see reducing software and hardware costs. That's price. And then down a few more options on consumption factors. So changing from a CapEx model to an OpEx model instead. In fact, since people can only choose one of the most important, 9 plus 7, 16 plus 6, 22% of organizations, the thing that would make them drive to change, economics. Number 3, the cloud. You can't have an IT modernization conversation in 2021 without talking about the cloud and moving from an all on-premise data protection solution to leveraging the cloud as part of your data protection strategy. Number 4, better outcomes, better capabilities. In this case, reducing your RPO, your recovery point objective, meaning how much data can you lose? Reducing the amount of downtime, the recovery time objective, RTO. Similarly, we want to reduce complexity. We want to reduce operational management. So make it simpler, protect more often. Capabilities, outcomes. Those are the drivers for 2021. It's got to work better. It needs to cost less. It needs to leverage the cloud, and it needs to give you a better range of capabilities. That's what's driving data protection change in 2021. And that's where Veeam comes into the picture. We call our solution architecture cloud data management. And it absolutely starts with better backup and more reliable recovery. Because once you solve for backup, once you've solved and are assured of having recovery, then you can do some really interesting things like cloud mobility, moving workloads between platforms, orchestration automation, getting rid of the humans and automating and scripting tasks that will be done for you. Monitoring and analytics. So now that you know that you have backup, let's figure out how the rest of the environment is doing. And then governance and compliance. It's not just enough to have your data in some box waiting for bad things to happen. Do you know what you have? Are you keeping it long enough, but not too long? Those are the core tenets of Veeam's cloud data management strategy. And as we look at that, as it relates to the Microsoft ecosystem, there's a lot of different things to be backed up, to be protected and recoverable and managed, including Microsoft Office 365 as a SaaS platform, native Azure virtual machines as an IaaS platform, Kubernetes running in Azure as a PaaS platform, and then certainly the modern data center is not going anywhere. And so virtual and physical servers running Windows and powered on Hyper-V as well as VMware and other hypervisors as well. All of these are part of that Microsoft ecosystem, and all of them are protectable with Veeam's cloud data management stack. Now, this is a very busy slide. You're welcome to grab a screenshot of it. We're going to talk about each of these 4 scenarios over the next 16 minutes or so. Let's get started. When we look at the overall landscape, let's look at what Microsoft 365 offers in the upper left-hand corner, the broader Microsoft Azure platform across the upper right-hand side, and then certainly the on-prem data centers and locations on the bottom of the screen as well. I shared earlier we're going to give you 6 ways to accelerate your journey to the cloud. Let's look at the first one, which is Office 365. Now, when we say Office 365, it includes not only Exchange Online, which most people think of, but certainly SharePoint and OneDrive, even more components we'll talk about in just a minute. And all of those can be protected to an instance of Veeam Backup for Office 365 running within Azure as a VM itself. In order to make sure that's cost effective, we can actually store all of your long-term backups in Azure Blob storage. Now, for some organizations, being all cloud is a great outcome, but in other organizations, they want to make sure we have at least one copy of our data we can actually put our hands on. So you're welcome to run Veeam Backup for Office 365 on-premise within your own environment. Now you've got that one copy of your data that you can hold on to. You can have local copies of that data in local storage, but again, you are welcome to use Azure Blob storage as that long-term retention tier. Now, for some folks, there are some built-in capabilities around Office 365 that solve some of the aspects of a broader data protection story. What I've offered to you in the lower left-hand corner is 5 different tenets of what most data protection solutions ought to encompass. And what you see in the first one, in service resiliency, that's all blue. That's all Microsoft. And what we mean by that is Microsoft Office 365 is natively durable. If my email or my files come from Redmond, Washington, Tempe, Arizona, Dublin, Ireland, I don't really care, right? So certainly the Office 365 platform is natively durable, and so it solves for that. But for most of the other data protection scenarios, it's important to think about where can Veeam complement what's already being done from the Microsoft ecosystem. And that's why you see some little Harvey balls down there that are partially blue and partially green. From a legal hold perspective, we complement what's already being done in some licenses of Office 365. We complement what's been done from a regulatory compliance perspective to truly give you long-term retention that's consistent with the same retention policies that you have for your on-premise regulatorily mandated data. Certainly from an operational backup perspective, that's Veeam's forte, and we complement the Microsoft ecosystem from there. In fact, you can even use Veeam Backup for Office 365 as part of your broader migration and deployment strategy. And by the way, you can then store that data, as you see in the upper right-hand corner, in Azure Blob Storage, in one of the many tens of thousands of Veeam Cloud Connect partners, or on-premises. And in all cases, be able to do granular restores of Exchange items, SharePoint items, individual file items on OneDrive, all using native tools back to their original platform. One of the things we're most excited about with version 5 of Veeam Backup for Microsoft Office 365 is the ability of adding teams. In that upper left-hand corner, we've added that 4th icon for you. And that's exciting because if 2020 has taught us nothing else, it's taught us the importance of collaboration. And certainly a lot of that today is being done in teams. A lot of business information is being relayed within the Teams framework. We need to back that up for all the same reasons we protect your files and your SharePoint items and your email. And what you see here is that while the production data might be Microsoft 365 on the top or your on-prem Exchange and SharePoint servers in the lower left-hand corner, either way, it gets backed up to S3 compatible storage on-prem, to Azure Blob storage, or onto on-prem storage down locally. And then we can restore using those native tools. We can restore using an Exchange-specific tool that'll restore Exchange Online and Exchange on-prem. Same thing for SharePoint. Same thing for OneDrive. Individual items, exports, even being able to provide self-service through some of our service provider networks. So that's your first way to accelerate your journey to the cloud, is simply by, as you leverage more and more of Microsoft Office 365, make sure that just because you're moving from servers to services, you continue to back that data up with Veeam. So that was the first way. Now let's talk about the modern on-premise data center And certainly for all of your physical and virtual machines that still run within your data centers as well as in your remote or branch offices, for that, we want to use Veeam Backup and Replication, our flagship product, which will first protect your data to disk, local storage in the lower right-hand corner, and then to Azure Blob storage as your long-term, offline, remote, secondary copy of data. To do that, within the Veeam Backup and Replication platform, you can see here different kinds of purpose-built storage appliances for data protection, like a data domain or an exagrid on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, we're just going to pick Azure Blob Storage, picking that as a secondary tier, and we're ready to start getting our data out of the building for long-term retention. We do that for any data that you've protected via that was originally running on VMware, on Hyper-V, on Nutanix in the virtualized environment, for your physical servers running Windows Server, Windows Client, or even if you have Linux machines running within a virtualized environment on Hyper-V. And of course, the same thing would hold true protecting native machines within Azure. In all cases, we're simply going to store that data as retention storage within the Azure Blob storage platform. By the way we do that, when we store data, we store it within what we call a VBK file, and it holds the individual blocks of data that was protected, as well as the metadata that describes that. We have a concept that we call a capacity tier, which basically says, let's go ahead and take the blocks of data and send those into Azure Blob storage, but keep the metadata. In fact, keep the metadata in both places. We keep it on-prem so we can easily find out which objects do we need to pull back from the cloud. We also put the metadata in the cloud because that way, if you have a complete site-level disaster, those backups in Azure Blob Storage are self-describing. I can connect a brand new copy of Veeam software to that same Azure Blob Storage container and then start pulling data right back again. In Veeam, we make this as simple as checking a box that you'd like to scale out to leverage a cloud-based repository using object storage. You can see that with the Blob B as a pull down. And then you have interesting options like, I want to make a copy to the cloud as soon as my backup is done, or keep everything local, but after 7 days, move those backups out to the cloud. And you can also encrypt them as well. So that's how we leverage Azure storage for traditional backups. One of the things we're excited about in Veeam Backup and Replication version 11 is being able to leverage the archive tier. We already have performant disk on-prem, NAS, SAN, local disk. We already have the capacity tier that I just showed you. But now we're going to be able to actually leverage for grandfather, father, son, or daily, weekly, monthly, some kind of a tiered rotation system to add to colder storage within the Azure environment. That's going to, it's policy-based, it reduces cost, it further reduces space, et cetera. And by the way, none of this costs anything. It's just included with Veeam. So now we've got our data up in a cloud. There's a few other things we can do while we're there. Any production workload that you protected with Veeam Backup and Replication, even the free community edition, even the agents for native Windows desktops and Linux desktops, or for the Nutanix platform. In any case, if you were to lose the production environment, you can actually restore those directly into Azure or onto Azure Stack. This also gives you the ability to have cloud mobility. So you're not just thinking about disaster recovery. You're not just thinking about dire scenarios. This makes Veeam part of your migration strategy. Do that last backup of a physical server on-prem, and then go ahead and then restore it into Azure. You've tested your recovery because now that works. And now you are in a hybrid cloud architecture. That's your third way to accelerate your journey to the cloud. Either proactively migrating workloads from on-premise into Azure hosting, or reactively by leveraging Azure infrastructure as your disaster recovery site, bringing those machines up when the primary environment has gone down. So far, we've talked about Office 365. We've talked about protecting the data center workloads. But what about those workloads that are born in the cloud, that are using Azure hosting from the very beginning? As I said earlier, just because you decided to run on somebody else's metal Microsoft's metal, instead of your own infrastructure on-premise, does not absolve you of the need to back up and have previous versions. And for that, we have Veeam Backup from Microsoft Azure. Same core capabilities and being able to back up those natively hosted Azure VMs into Veeam, and then for long-term retention as well. In the upper left-hand corner, what you're looking at here is your native Azure environment. You've got VMs running within Azure. In fact, Veeam Backup for Microsoft Azure is itself a VM. You can leverage the native snapshot capabilities built into Azure Storage, and those come across as the snapshot you see in the upper right-hand corner, but that's not sufficient for long-term retention. So instead, Veeam Backup for Microsoft Azure will leverage those snapshots, even manage them for you, but then also do backups from those snaps. And in fact, what you look at in the lower left-hand corner is once it's in the Veeam format, not only are we holding that data within the cloud, within Azure Storage, you can also even recover that data back to an on-prem environment. Again, maybe that's a reverse migration for a workload that started in the cloud and you want to bring it on-prem. Or in other cases, it's for compliance, DevOps, any of those scenarios. Once that data is in that consistent Veeam format, there's a lot of powerful things that we can do with that. Our fifth way is embracing that mobility and being able to actually move workloads between on-premise and Azure hosting. There's actually a combination of capabilities that comes from leveraging both Veeam Backup and Replication, version 11, and Veeam Backup for Microsoft Azure, version 2. And when those get together, you can actually manage your Veeam Backup for Azure instances from your Veeam Backup and Replication data center UI. You also get some really cool capabilities to instantly recover from one to another and move those workloads back and forth based on the needs of the business. I told you there were 6 ways to accelerate your journey to the cloud. And for the first 5, we're talking about the traditional, modern, or hybrid data center. But for this last one, we recognize that for many organizations, Kubernetes is the future of infrastructure. And one of the best places to run Kubernetes on is Azure. So we're really excited about the fact that in 2020, Veeam purchased a company called Kasten, the leader in Kubernetes-based backup. And you can see that regardless of where you put your Kubernetes containers, Kasten will back it up there. Across the myriad different kinds of data sources that are out there, Kasten's K10 by Veeam is built to protect that data as well. So as you move to that next generation architecture, Veeam has you backed up there as well. I hope this has been useful for you. Hopefully what you saw was that Veeam's cloud data management solution covers all the different ways that your production environment can reside on and really be dependent on a Microsoft ecosystem, whether it's native Office 365, whether it's traditional VMs hosted in Azure, Kubernetes running within the Azure Kubernetes service, or the traditional virtual and physical environments hosted on Hyper-V, and Windows running across any hypervisor within the modern data center today. Across all of these platforms and all of our capabilities, please keep in mind, Veeam is the most trusted provider of backup solutions that deliver that cloud data management platform and experience that you've come to trust us with within the modern data center. All of our solutions are built around 3 core principles. Keep it simple, make sure it's flexible, and always, always reliable. I hope this session was useful. When you think about Veeam, think about us as for cloud data, it's backup for what's next. For more information, check out vee.am/mscloud. I'm Jason Buffington from Veeam. Thanks for watching.